So 3 o'clock in Amsterdam and many other cities. Good afternoon and welcome everybody. This is the second installment of Gaming in Holland's new webinar series. We intend to have a new episode on the relevant topic roughly every month. Because of the number of speakers of today, our webinar will run a bit longer than the usual 45 minutes, but we will try to keep it under one hour. We have high-level experts with us today. We hope their expertise will be helpful to you. Yesterday, we also learned that casinos in the Netherlands will be allowed to reopen from July 1st. This is very good news for the sector. We also have a date for this year's Gaming in Holland conference. The 2020 Gaming in Holland conference will take place on September 22nd in Amsterdam, one day prior to IGB Live. This will allow you to attend 2 events in one trip. But back to today's webinar. The webinar consists of 3 parts. First, René Jansen, Chairman of the Netherlands Gambling Authority, will give a short speech on the latest developments in the Dutch gambling market, including the National Player Exclusion Register, CRUKS. Second, our 4 panelists will each address and answer 2 relevant questions. Third, during the last part of the webinar, we will open up the discussion and invite our listeners to submit their own questions to our panelists. In order to submit your questions and to vote in our poll, please make use of the Slido app. It's anonymous and it's free. You can download it from the App Store or scan the QR code on the screen and click the link. The events tag is GIH. GIH. So if you point your camera to the QR code that you see on the screen now, you get straight to the Slido app. Next slide, please. Gaming in Holland and the business community we represent is being made possible by the generous support of our partners and sponsors. Thank you. We could not do this without you. Next slide, please. As I said, and we still have people coming in, and welcome to the webinar. To fully participate in this webinar, meaning for you to vote in our poll and to submit questions to our panelists, it is necessary to make use of the Slido app. You can download it from the App Store or scan the QR code and click the link. It's anonymous and it's free. If you make use of the app, the event code for this webinar is GIH. GIH. Next slide, please. So once you're inside the Slido app, this is what you will see. There's two tabs. One to vote in our poll, that will come up in a minute, and the other to submit and upvote questions. You can switch between the tabs by clicking or tapping at the top of your screen. Next slide, please. Great, and today's webinar will be moderated by Andrew GELLATLY. He is the Head of Global Research at Vixio Gambling Compliance. Andrew from London, thank you for joining us, and I give the mic over to you now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Willem. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been honored to chair many Gaming in Holland panels before in the physical world, but I'm happy to move with the times and go online for this one for the first time, and with this amusing backdrop we've got too. The topic, as Willem explained, today is complying with CRUKS, getting ready for the Dutch exclusion register. But before we move on to our KSA participants, René Jansen and Jeroen Duurland, I have a poll to introduce, and this is a slightly unusual poll in the sense that we're doing it in the form of a word cloud. So, Gil, if you could move to show the poll question. Today's poll question is asking you to describe in 1 or 2 English words your main concern about CRUKS. Now, what are you concerned about with the implementation of CRUKS? Is it the cost? Is it the complexity, the unachievability, the opaqueness, the time frame for implementation, or the technical standards that you're unclear about? If you tell us those words that that conjure up CRUKS when you think of it, then we will map those on a word cloud, and by the end of the session this afternoon, we'll have a map of what you think of when you think about CRUKS. Now, while you put together your thoughts on the subject of CRUKS, it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker really for today, who's René Jansen. René Jansen became the chairman of the board of the directors of the Netherlands Gambling Authority on October 1st in 2018. Before that, he was a board member of the Netherlands Healthcare Authority and a board member of the Netherlands Competition Authority. So René, it's my great pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our webinar. With René in the background and backing him up on technical matters, and a late addition to the panel today is Jeroen Duurland, who's a project manager for CRUKS at CASA, and he will be able to answer any technical questions. Both René and Jeroen, as Willem pointed out, have kindly agreed to participate in our question and answer session. So if you have any questions you want to send via Slido, please do so, and René and Jeroen, as well as our 4 panelists, will be able to look at that. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce René, who's going to talk about CRUKS, amongst other things, more general issues with regard to the implementation of the new online gambling regime in Holland. René?
Yes. Good afternoon, dear participants, dear friends. This is a nice opportunity because we are struck off of the physical possibilities of joining together meetings. So I'm very happy that we have this seminar, this webinar this afternoon. And I would like to use this opportunity to give you an update on the state of affairs regarding the Remote Betting and Gambling Act, and more specifically, the Central Exclusion Register, which, as you heard already, is known as CRUKS. And thank you, Willem, for giving me this platform for a few minutes. I have said it before, and I will say it again now. De Kansspelautoriteit, the KSA, and operators have a joint interest in the smooth implementation of the Act and CRUKS as an important element thereof. But before I discuss the Act, the new Act, and CRUKS, I want you to know that amid these troubled times due to the coronavirus, the KSA fully understands that you, like many other enterprises, are facing severe difficulties. If you are a land-based operator, you are no doubt being impacted severely by the government measures needed in order to address this crisis. In various aspects, the KSA is certainly concerned. As a result of the measures to combat the coronavirus, arcades might be in danger of collapsing. In addition to being a source of anguish for enterprises and their employees, this paves the way for more illegal offers. And I have absolutely no illusions about hardcore illegal operators having any regard whatsoever for addiction prevention efforts. Let us hope that the reopening of casinos and arcades on the 3rd of July will be an important step towards normal routine, and that the economic damage will ultimately be less serious than expected. That is my hope for players, and this is my hope for you. And now about the new Act, the Remote Gambling Act. As you probably already know, the secondary legislation, or the subordinate legislation, in which the last details are being arranged and fleshed out, is very close to being finished. Our Minister, Sander Dekker for Legal Protection, who is responsible for our gambling policy, sent answers to questions about this subordinate legislation to the House of Representatives on the 7th of May. And according to the current timetable, those answers are on the House's agenda for the 3rd of June. The answers indicate that the Minister still aims for the Act to enter into force on the 1st of July 2021. However, he has said, and I quote, that the possibility that there will be some delay as a result of the measures taken to control the spread of the COVID-19 can't be completely ruled out in advance. In this regard, your position and that of the KSA are the same. It's the Minister who decides when the Act will enter into force. And unless we hear otherwise, we will assume that that will happen on the 1st of January. We must do this, as must you. In concrete terms, this means that as from the 1st of January, the KSA will be able to process applications for remote gambling licenses. The online market will then open on the 1st of July 2021. It also means that for the land-based sector, CRUKS must be up and running by the 1st of January. That has also been consistently stated by the Minister. I can tell you now that the KSA is about to unveil the details of the connection procedure. This can be expected to take place in mid-June. The information primarily focuses on the land-based operators. I realize that this is a bit later than promised, but the coronavirus pandemic has forced us to make some changes. Whereas we initially wanted to hold physical technical connection sessions in June, we now plan to provide these online. The upshot is that we will be opening a digital information desk from which we will explain how to install the system. This will take place by appointment and will in each case involve a limited number of operators to enable as much attention as possible to be given to any questions which may arise. Operators are responsible for the implementation of CRUKS, but the KSA wants and will facilitate this as best as possible. For example, it will be possible to submit questions in advance. These can then be discussed during an interactive session. Here again applies, the KSA and operators have a common interest in a smooth implementation of CRUKS. And of course, we will also provide access to technical information via our website. So keep an eye out for our messages. Ladies and gentlemen, the 5 minutes I was allotted by Willem have come to an end. So it's time to wrap up. I certainly understand that as an entrepreneur, you have many other things to worry about during this Corona time. Nonetheless, I ask that you give CRUKS the attention that the register deserves. It is, after all, in the interest of effectively preventing gambling addiction, which is in all of our interest. The prevention of addiction is a crucial part of all our operations, including to ensure strong and solid support for the regulation of the gambling market in both the land-based and online segments. So thank you for your attention now. I wish you a very productive webinar. And of course, I will be available for the Q&A session later on this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, René. That was a very, very helpful characterization of the difficult situation that the industry is in now, but also setting out some pathways and some assurances that their help will be provided in terms of the setting up of CRUKS. Now it's my pleasure to move on to our panel from experts from across the industry, from every part of the land-based and online industry in the Netherlands, and also from the identity verification world. It's my great pleasure, first of all, to introduce Jannie Weerder, who's the Director of Security at Holland Casino. She's been there for 9 years, and obviously rejoicing in the news today that she'll be able, that Holland Casinos will be able to open earlier. With Jannie, we have Frank Castellins, who's the CEO of Hotel Gaming, and a co-owner of JVH Gaming. They run Jack's Casino and a number of other arcades and recreational centers across Holland. With Frank and with Jannie, we have David Foster. I'm pleased to introduce David again. He's the head of regulatory affairs at GVC. Before that, he was public affairs director at Paddy Power Betfair. And GVC is prominent in the Dutch market. It operates brands such as bwin, Ladbrokes, Sportingbet, and Foxy Casino. Welcome, David. And finally, I'm pleased to welcome Erwin Oderashing Varma. He's the managing director of Janus ID, which is a high-level verification firm. He's been running Janus ID for 6 years and provides verification for all internet services. Previously, he was a program manager for the Dutch Railways and for ING, so he's going to be able to also bring some experience from other sectors, other industries, and see what we can learn from them. First of all, it will be my great pleasure to pose some questions to Jannie Weerder from Holland Casino, and I think because the questions are going to appear on the screen, so you can all see what I'm asking. Essentially, Jannie, welcome and congratulations again. Now, to cut straight to it, what do you feel, having heard from René just now, what guidance do you still require from the regulator to properly prepare for the implementation of CRUKS on the 1st of January?
Thank you. At first, thank you, Willem, for hosting this webinar. Yesterday we had the breaking news. So at first I have to say that Holland Casino is very happy with the foresight on the reopening on July the 1st. It is a hard time for us, as René Jansen mentioned, closing for almost 4 months, but 6 months would be worse. We're busy to preparing and then going open on the 1st of July. And now about CRUKS. Let me start by saying that we have only one chance to implement CRUKS correctly. CRUKS is the cornerstone of the Remote Gaming Act, and we deem it essential that CRUKS is implemented as soon as possible to ensure that players are optimally protected. We have therefore urged the Gaming Authority last week to share its planning in order to ensure that we are ready when COA enters into force. My response is not a total commercial one, of course. For Holland Casino, it is important to have an intensive responsible gaming program. This is one of our main reasons for existence. Lifetime value from our visitors has to be combined with a good responsible gaming program. And for the question, I can say that Holland Casino is already using an electronic system for registered visitors. We do not only register, but also verifying identification documents. This is our first step in our responsible gaming process, but it is also mandatory for anti-money laundering rules. For the land-based casinos and the online casinos, there will be no choice to do this. I do not know the position of arcades in this discussion. I think this is still under investigation, and we are still waiting for an indication about this. But playing anonymously will not be possible in a regulated market anymore in the Netherlands. For both subjects, the responsible gaming and the AML, we have an incident management system which is connected with the system for visitors registration. If there is, for example, a ban in case of responsible gaming, the receptionist will stop the guest at the entrance for a conversation with an employee of security and responsible gaming. As far as we know, there is a real-time check possible with CRUKS, and I hope it will be a real-time check. So that is one of our requirements we need. The receptionist who is verifying the ID of the visitor will get immediately a signal that this person is not allowed to play. And again, the conversation with the employee of security of responsible gaming will start. We do not know if we have to register this contact or if the Gaming Authority is doing this registration. So this is what we need to know, who is going to register this. In case of responsible gaming, an attempt to go into a casino or to log in on an online casino, it will be a signal for responsible gaming. That should be a problem gambler, we think. It could be that the lower legislation will be that register an attempt is not allowed in case of privacy, but we don't know it yet. Because we have already the ban in our system, CRUKS will work for us. It is not very complicated. An important thing that we also want to know is what is going to happen if CRUKS is out of order. Experience with complex systems is that there always can be problems. The internet can fall out, the Wi-Fi, all the problems we know already. If the connection between CRUKS and our visitor system is gone, can we then open our venues? That's a question that we have. Sometimes you have also it happens when the cashless payment systems are out of order. The shops have to be closed because there's there's nothing more to do then. If we now have technical problems with our connection, the connection between our visitor system and our incident management system, we can do the check by hand, and we have to know how it's going to be with CRUKS situation. CRUKS is an important instrument in responsible gaming. This player protection has to start as quick as possible. Important is that our gaming authority starts to maintain the law. The new gaming law gives the KSA, our gaming authority, more opportunities to do this. IP blocking will be very helpful combined with the implementation of CRUKS. The entrance to unprotected and illegal play has to be stopped. CRUKS gives the branch a level playing field in player protection. As Holland Casino, we know that our banned players are looking for other opportunities to play. That could be illegal online, but also to an arcade, legal or illegal or abroad. If they go abroad, well, our supervision is over, and also for our gaming authority, I think. For the problem gambler, this is only a small amount. It is better to make, for the problem gamblers, this is only a small amount. Most of our players are not problem gamblers. I think 95%, there will be no problems. It's a very little group of our players. It is better to make it as difficult as possible to play. A cool down is the best support for a problem gambler. What we need from the regulator is clear and transparent requirements. The requirements should be available for the players so that they know that playing anonymously and unprotected is not possible anymore. A regulated market is in all safe and secure aspects a benefit for players. That's what my answer is in the first question.
Okay. Thank you, Yanni, for clarifying that and for highlighting your concerns about who's responsible for registration, what happens if there's what the backup plan is if there's a system failure. Those are really important things. Maybe we'll come back to that later on. Okay, so the next question is flipping the view around from the customer's point of view. And you've talked about your concerns about privacy. What do you think the customers are going to be thinking about their privacy with the CRUKS system?
Yeah, oh, that will be a very difficult one, I think. I think that the CRUKS system has to be GDPR proof so that the chance of on a data breach is zero. Protection of information is on top of mind of Holland Casino, and it also will be for the KSA, I think. Customers are already used to register in Holland Casino, and they know that we have a system for them and an incident management system, and also register with all the players they are visiting Holland Casino. We do not only register, of course, I told, but also verifying identification documents. As I mentioned before, playing anonymously under the new regulation is almost impossible. No registration, no entries. Customers know this. But I think that maybe CRUKS is more a discussion for our visitors, because now the control is from the government. Registration with a governmental character can give a different feeling for our customers. We don't know it yet because, well, it's going to be a new thing in the future, but it could be a problem for them. That is why it is important that requirements must be clear and transparent for the industry, but also for the players. Important is also how the check on CRUKS is registered. How can we prove that the person at the entry is the person in CRUKS? That will be a big challenge. We need a secure system under GDPR rules which can support this. Dealing with the BSN number is possible in limited situations at this moment, but it could be a solution, of course. In case of the GDPR, the check will still be a challenge. Our regulator is protecting problem gamblers by making it impossible to play anonym. On behalf of player protection, a very important rule. A good contact with the privacy authority is a precondition for this. So I think that concerns about privacy has to be explained by the industry to our players, not only to the problem gamblers, but also to the other players, but also by the regulator and the gaming authority. If playing anonym is not possible anymore, the breach of privacy would be good for the acceptance. That's what I would say about the last question.
Okay, Yanni, thank you for covering those. The only time will tell, I guess, what the players make of this, but it's clearly going to be very helpful for the industry if they have a very clear idea of what it is they've got to ask and when they've got to ask it. So for now, I'd like to move on to our second panelist, who can bring the land-based and arcade, land-based machines and arcade perspective to our panel. Welcome, Frank. Now, for you, I've got I'm really looking at the question of implementation on the land-based side that you've received from the Netherlands Gambling Authority regarding the implementation of this. What concerns do you have above and beyond the ones that Yanni has just outlined?
Yes, thank you. First, let me thank Willem for inviting me in this webinar. I thank Gaming in Holland for organizing, and I think it's very helpful for the business that we can share our thoughts in a webinar like this. Concerning the implementation of CRUKS, of course, it's let me start to say that's a very positive thing. If a player wants to be excluded from gambling, they can do so. We have also positive results of our current operating exclusion system. Like Holland Casino, we have a different system, but people who want to exclude themselves, they can, and that's necessary and works. To combine this in a total system is very helpful for the player. At this moment, my answer will be a lot shorter than Yanni's answer. We are worried about timing. Timing because the gaming authorities have cancelled the information meetings in March, and as a matter of fact, you find some information, like Yanni already said, at the website of the gaming authorities, but that's only a few pages, and we need much more. And we need to know what hardware and software we need. We need to start to develop, test, train people, implement the system, and we need to develop the trust of our guests. This system will be a new system for the gaming arcades, and we need to test this and build it up with our guests that they get used to it. So since we are now already in end of May, and we just hear from René that we get more information in June, we still have to start, and everybody knows that it's quite hard and software processes take quite some time. So we are pretty sure we get short of time. Then another point is the social security number. Everywhere the government is warning not to give you a social security number. So I see a big burden to overcome there. On the other hand, it's also a big responsibility for the KSA, yeah, because we have a countrywide system, and I'm also a little bit afraid of hackers. Like we had the concerns about medical dossiers in Holland. We have the concerns about weed pass, which never happened. People do not want to have their information on the street. So there's a big responsibility. Thank you.
Frank, thank you for that. That's very valid concerns, particularly regarding the social security number and the timescale for implementation. I've got a second question, which is the follow-up regarding the amusement centre's obligation to maintain a visitor registration database. And how do these two databases connect together, CRUKS and the visitor registration database? How does it complicate or make easy your efforts?
Yeah, that's. Let me first say we were flabbergasted that this visitor registration system came in without any consulting of the gaming arcades. For us, it came by a strike on clear sky. So we are a little bit worried about handling this because as we understand it from the documentation that's provided, we get a CRUKS code as soon as somebody comes in, and every operator has to build up his own software system to maintain these CRUKS codes. And so that means that we have a countrywide gaming authority system where we have a hit, no hit, is somebody in the CRUKS system or not, and it can be really handled quickly. But then we need to make a second system where we follow the player. So we have to count how many times a player will come in. That's a totally different system. And yeah, we as an operator, we are in the Van der Valk hotels. We have casinos in hotels, and you need to know, after some events, we get big groups in, sometimes 100 people. If we have to administrate all these recreational players in a visitor database, we will definitely lose this business. And for what? Only people who only come once. So this is, for us, it's shooting a mosquito with a gun. And let me explain this a little bit further. Let me clarify this with a question for you all in this webinar. Do you think that the number of visits someone goes to a McDonald's can be an indicator of obesitas? And here for my computer, I would say yes. And behind your desk, you would say yes. If somebody goes a lot to McDonald's, there's a bigger chance to develop obesitas. But if I'm an employee at McDonald's, I would say, sorry, I don't need a system like that. Because if somebody is developing obesitas and growing, yeah, We will see that because we are working in this McDonald's, and you see when he walks in the door. And that's exactly the same in our casinos. We don't need this. We have educated people on the floor in our relatively small venues. That's maybe different with Holland Casino, who have really big venues, but we have small venues and we know our guests. If a players come too often, spend too much, or behave differently, we will talk to him. We are in good personal contact, and I'm afraid that the visitor registration database is so time consuming that it will affect the attention we have now for players. Visitor registration on an operator level is where I'm also really worried about, and it's the case of hacking. And if we have one case, it doesn't matter at which operator, it will affect the whole land-based industry. People do not want to give their privacy-sensitive information to land-based arcades. But maybe it's going to happen, and we are a bit worried about that. But let me finish with a positive note. I always like to finish with a positive note. So if the entrance barrier for the gaming arcades is exactly the same as to enter a Holland Casino, I think there's no reason left to make any difference in game selection and height of stakes between, in my case, a Grand Casino and a Holland Casino. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank, for that bid for bit equality and machine categorization there. And also, I very much appreciate your commentary with regard to the disruption of a sort of existing ecosystem of customer interaction that already takes place in the land-based environment. As necessary a step towards responsible gambling policy as CRUKS is, it will be existing on top of another layer that already exists there. Now, for a different perspective and from a solely online perspective, I'd like to move on to talk to David Foster, who is with GVC, who's the head of regulatory affairs there. Now, David's got plenty of experience across different European and American markets with regard to player registration and an exclusion and self-exclusion policies. So from the elevated view of GVC, what has your experience been of national player registration databases so far? What can you draw from that, and what do you feel about these the introduction of one in Holland?
Andrew, I think in general we feel very positively about the principle of national self-exclusion registers. We feel that nowadays they're a pretty fundamental piece in the sort of responsible gambling jigsaw. Certainly not a silver bullet, but something that, when combined with all the other tools and processes we have at our disposal, can certainly be a very effective means of protecting players. Certainly a single centralized national self-exclusion register is a far more effective concept than the sort of piecemeal approach that we've seen in the past, whereby players would have to self-exclude from multiple different operators or indeed betting shops. That just doesn't have the same impact. And in recent years, we've seen national self-exclusion registers developed and implemented successfully in a number of international jurisdictions. And it's very encouraging from our perspective to see the Netherlands following suit in this regard. I think in terms of how self-exclusion can benefit the industry, as a responsible operator, we always want to ensure our players have a safe, secure and enjoyable gambling environment. But when players are unable to enjoy their gambling in such a manner, self-exclusion is in our view a valuable tool to help them stop their gambling in the first instance, take a break, and potentially seek the support that they need to overcome their issues. And ultimately, if the net result of providing this functionality is that problem gambling rates reduce over time, then this is obviously good news for operators, but also good news for society at large. So overall, we're fully supportive of CRUKS in the Netherlands, and our immediate focus now is not only to obtain a better understanding and get more clarity on the precise technology specifications and implementation steps that will be required, but also to engage constructively with the gaming authority while it's putting the finishing touches on the CRUKS system. and to pass on our knowledge and expertise that we've gained in other markets to hopefully ensure that CRUKS functions as effectively as it possibly can.
Well, my second question would go a little bit deeper into that and ask you to pick out some examples. I mean, do in your experience these markets, these player exclusion registers work? Which ones have worked well? What characterizes a success, and what characterizes something that requires improvement?
I think in our view, to draw on some examples, the Rofus system in Denmark has worked well, as has the Spellhouse system in Sweden, as well as the GamStop in the UK as well. So I think those are probably three jurisdictions we would hold up as examples and say they've done a pretty good job. This is because these systems generally provide a good user journey. They require straightforward technology integrations. They're supported by clear guidance, and also operators were afforded enough time to be able to implement them. Although I think in Sweden, a few operators struggled a little bit for time towards the end. But on the flip side, we've been less keen on the likes of France, Germany and Italy. We feel there are probably some deficiencies there that we wouldn't want to see replicated in the Netherlands. In France, for example, identifying the player can sometimes require multiple data sets, which is far less accurate and harder to collate from our perspective. In the Netherlands, obviously, the BSN number, the social security number is a very good starting point, as it's unique and unambiguous. But in cases where that BSN number can't be used, we need to make sure that there's a clear plan B for collecting that information. I also mentioned Germany, which we don't feel has an optimal system in place at present, because the blacklist that does exist comes from the land-based system, and that doesn't really translate smoothly into an online environment. But in the Dutch context, we have a few outstanding concerns which we'd like to see addressed, and where some of those international precedents can provide some useful context. Like Yanni mentioned earlier, one of our concerns would be around what happens when the CRUKS service is down. Can we still continue to take play? Can we still continue to take registrations, especially at peak times? We would argue that we should be able to, and provided the players are rechecked immediately once the service is back up and running. And that's something that works in Spain, and something we'd certainly like to see replicated in the Netherlands. Secondly, it's somewhat unusual for players to also be able to sign up to the register via an operator. I think only in Germany and Italy, in our direct experience, is that the case. We would prefer it if players were only able to go directly to the regulator or the relevant body that manages the central register, because this cuts out the middleman, so to speak, and reduces the scope for incorrect information to be transmitted, which can obviously have major ramifications. So we feel it's better to decouple the sign-up process, which should be done by the player, and the checking against the list, which should be done by the operator. But perhaps it may be a little bit too late in the process to change this particular requirement. But in any case, overall, we hope the Dutch authorities will listen to the industry and look at best practice from other countries as it's kind of finalising and putting the finishing touches on the CRUKS system, looking at what's worked well, avoiding some of the mistakes that have been made elsewhere, and ultimately, hopefully, this will provide an efficient and effective CRUKS system that works for operators, for consumers, and for policymakers as well.
Thanks, David. I'll take from that your emphasis on the user experience and a smooth technological solution, and also note that you're the second panelist to point out the questions over redundancy of what happens if the system is down. Now, fortunately, we have a technology expert on ID verification coming up next. So Owen Varma would be, I'm sure, able and in a good position to answer some of these questions. So Owen, may I ask you from a technologist point of view, what sort of information are operators going to require before they can implement CRUKS? What's the missing parts of this jigsaw at the moment? Have we got Owen? Yeah.
Erwin is currently muted right now. Could you please unmute Erwin?
He's the only one who hasn't got the background working as well. So
Is a technical expert.
You can rely on the.
Everyone, can you please unmute?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, you're back.
Let me get back to, yeah, okay, sorry.
Well,
Thanks, Andrew, for this question. And a lot of related items came up with the speakers prior to me. I'll limit my answer to some basic items, and then maybe we'll touch upon some more. Basically, what it comes down to when implementing CRUKS is the what and the how. What exactly is the CRUKS code made up of, and what data items are needed from the player, and also how is the code calculated and how is the CRUKS call made. In our white paper recently distributed through Gaming in Holland, we identified some details needed to close these gaps that may occur when determining any player's CRUKS code. What personal data are to be used should be precisely defined. For each data item, the format in which it has to be processed for CRUKS should be specified. For instance, a date starting with its year number will provide a different CRUKS code than when it starts with its day number. Also, CRUKS code definitions vary. For instance, there is a difference in what applies to players with a Dutch passport and those without. It was addressed as the BSN issue. These gaps need to be filled in detail, otherwise operators are at risk of making incorrect calls and resulting in mishits and all issues that may come from that. Also, operators need to know how to determine the CRUKS code. The logic by which its value is calculated from the data needs to be communicated for this. As long as operators don't know how to do this, they cannot do the math each time they get a player's data. The calculation logic has to be watertight, so to speak. All operators and the KSA alike have to come up with the same CRUKS code when presented with the same player's data. And finally, operators need to know how to access CRUKS. This will likely be through an API, which needs to be specified and communicated so the operators can implement and test it. We trust the KSA, and it's been said by the regulator, René Jansen, that they will provide these details shortly, but it's high importance that it's complete and timely so the operators can prepare for CRUKS effectively and try to be ready by the end of the year.
Thanks, Owen. It sounds like a lot of pressure on these digital meetings at the beginning of June, a lot of questions to be answered. You've been around the block, you've implemented technological ID verification solutions in a number of different industries. So, you know, what can we learn from other sectors, and how likely it's in the context of things not tending to get finished on time in this whole scheme? How likely is it that CRUKS will be finished on time, do you think?
Well, it's a question that is obviously very difficult to answer. How likely will we be on time? But there are some guidelines for this that may be helpful, because as David indicated already, CRUKS is not the first players register in Europe. Though the others are not identical to what CRUKS is aimed to be, we can still learn from their experience. And also, as you mentioned, Andrew, in other sectors in the Netherlands, we have national registers that may provide useful guidance for CRUKS. You can think of the BKR credit register, the big register for healthcare workers, Duo for students, and the OV chip card system for public transport. Although some of these, or most of them, are quite complex, they all share a simple basis, and that's to verify whether a person is registered in it, yes or no. And that's where the link to CRUKS probably lies. I'll expand a bit on the OV chip card service. The OV chip card service is an open service which is available to all operators and travelers. It has sound data protection in place, and the OV chip card has far more functionality and complexity than CRUKS would ever need, but its identification service would qualify as a very good example. Because like the CRUKS code, the OV chip card's code is an anonymous but personal code. And I'm stating here that's anonymous code, and previously there may have been some doubt whether it is anonymous or not, the CRUKS code, but I suggest and I hope it will be not consisting of actual personal data. Moving on, this over chip cards code is checked in the central database, and if that's okay, the gate opens, just like it would be done for the CRUKS code. And this single code, it works for trains, buses, trams, metros, taxis, and bicycles alike. It is just as interoperable as you would want for the gaming industry. My guess is try to find the points in the over chip card solution that may help CRUKS become a solid and also GDPR friendly service, so that no issues with the Data Protection Authority would arise. Finally, given that the complete specs of CRUKS have not yet been communicated, it will be a challenge to have it fully up and running in the gaming industry by the end of 2020. The current Corona situation steepens this challenge, obviously. On the other hand, CRUKS is not rocket science. It may still be feasible to have it in place and interacting with online operators on time. But this also be the case and feasible for land-based operators, in my opinion, it's not likely. Designing and implementing a fitting solution for them will require more time and effort, and seeking guidance in and maybe align with other sectors will probably speed things up. That's it.
Owen, thank you very much. That, you know, your final words on that it's a challenge to have this up and running by the end of 2020. That's I think what we're going to take away from that, and some of the, but at least the reassurance that there are blueprints and models from other sectors to apply. Now, I think we can go back to the results of our poll and see if words like challenge were words that you all picked up in your mental map of CRUKS. Oh wow, there you go. So by far the most popular word was technical, and complexity beside it as a related word. Implementation and timelines both scored quite heavily too, and cost, concerns over time and timing, and privacy, perhaps less than we might have expected from the amount of discussion about privacy and GDPR that we heard in the panel. Availability, certainly there's some questions to be answered, but it may well be that the CASA will address those questions in their sessions during June. Now I think the next step is for us to open to questions from the audience, which may have been submitted from Slido. And here we are, because this can be voted up and down, these questions can be voted up and down by the number of people that vote for them. We are guaranteed to have the most popular questions, the one that's got the most likes here. What kind of timeline is expected for there to be technical documentation readily available? That sounds like a question for René and his team to me. René, are you there?
I'm here, but I think maybe Jeroen could take up this question. My colleague, Jeroen Duurland. There he is.
Welcome, Jeroen.
I think we can't hear you.
Mute, yeah.
He's currently on mute. Please unmute, sir.
Mute myself. Okay. Now you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We did plan for the documentation descriptions for mid-June. We will give a connection procedure and description of open API application program interface, how to connect, and test scenarios and test sets. Those are the main things to get started with. And for all, we did already send a message, start with getting a PKI certificate from KPN or Quo Vadis. So those are the main things you can start with.
Okay.
I hope that will answer the question.
I think that's a good starting point, and people can always follow up directly, presumably with more questions to you.
Can you elaborate a bit on the visitor registration system also?
No, that's no. I don't know anything about that now.
Okay.
That's in the law for the January 1st.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That will have to be a separate discussion, I think. At this
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
With the absence of clarity at the moment. Question on.
I must say, if I may, if you allow me, Jeroen is working more on the technical side of this implementation process, but there is much more around that we are preparing for it. We are also making some policy regulations on all the issues I think that were mentioned. Also, the reason why we want to have some visitor registration that might be very important also for a compulsory exclusion, which is initiated by an operator. So there will be, of course, an exclusion on its own will of a player, but there also will be a compulsory exclusion. And that might be because of the family asking it, or because a operator sees that there has frequently some excessive playing, and then the operators also can initiate a compulsory exclusion for a certain player. And well, so there's a huge complex that we are working on right now.
René, interesting one that you've mentioned, third-party exclusion by other family members. Is that something you're expecting to have to deal with as a regulatory burden yourselves?
Of course, it is a regulatory burden for us, but I think it's something that our political environment really asked to do, that we should accomplish that as an element, as a crucial element of the exclusion register. And I think we're not the first country doing it. I'm not mistaken, I think in Sweden and Denmark, Belgium, on a huge scale even, I think, the compulsory exclusion is a central issue of it.
Yes. Not to mention places like Singapore as well.
Okay.
We'll stay tuned to see how that comes together and how the numbers are. One question that we had in our rehearsal for this webinar and has popped up from quite a few people here is what happens with double passports? What happens if a guest arrives with perhaps a Belgian passport and a Dutch passport, or the Dutch identity card and a Belgian passport? Frank, what currently happens right now? Or equally, Yanni could answer this, but Frank first.
But what happens now? When we have now a system that we have the pictures of a customer who we have who has a self exclusion, and we manage this by looking at the customer. And as I explained earlier, somebody who's in our white list, as we call it, in our system, we know our guests, so we will recognize him. The thing is, when you have a nationwide system, you have to have a really closed system, and with two passports, that might be a difficult one. But that gives also a big responsibility, because if somebody comes in anyway and is not recognized by his passport, and he will play, then you get a big discussion. When he lost money, he will probably ask it back, and who's going to handle that?
Yeah, Yanni, can I ask you for the same response, or a response on the same topic?
Yeah, because we register all our visitors, we should see if there's the same date of birth and all the things. We could a good receptionist will see that, but it is, I think, difficult. But also when there is a ban on one of the passports, it's also the responsibility of the visitor by himself or by herself, that he's going to do that with the other passport. So we can't prevent all the things that can happen. That's the same which we will have online, because it could be very difficult if someone is going to check in and to log in on the name of his father or a friend or something like that. It's very hard to find out, but it's also the responsibility for the player by himself.
Yes, René, can I put that to you? There's a large element of player responsibility in a situation like this, where people do have, can use more than one form of identity.
Yeah, of course. You mean the first check we work with is the social security number, which in Netherlands we call it the burger service number, BSN. And that is, of course, mainly for Dutch citizens. So that is the first one. And next to that, because there are always people from other nationalities in our country. There might be tourists, but other people who just for some period in the country, a second nationality, we are building a certain workaround or an additional tool to have them checked and verified on the exclusion. I'm not in a position, because I'm not the big technician of this regulator, but we are working on that.
Actually, I think it's a very good question. I'm Dutch. Yeah, see my Dutch passport. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a Belgium identity card. I can show you also because I live in Belgium. Somewhere here, and those are not connected. So if I go in the exclusion register with my passport and I come the next day with my Belgium identity card, it's pretty hard to recognize me. So I think we have to live with those gaps. Yeah, if you have twins and one comes in on another passport of his brother, he also will not be recognized. But I don't know if what kind of, the question is, what kind of responsibility do we take it as an operator, or does the gaming authority takes if somebody slips through the holes of the net?
Yeah, because I think that when you have the two passports from different countries, the BSN number will not help us, of course, because it will be different then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I may add, is that okay, Andrew? Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
There are obviously ways to connect identities based on different passports and identity documents. It's the question, and that's, I think, what the KSA has a role in, as Frank is asking them. How watertight has this system to be, and how much trouble can we place upon the players to do that? Because it would be feasible to see if I've got a Frank Kasteleins with a Dutch passport and a Frank Kasteleins with a Belgian passport, the matching date of birth, that I do a probabilistic check on, okay, show your face and I've got your face from both IDs, and is this the same person? But is this the way to go, or should we allow for some room of error? It's something that the operators with the KSA can only answer.
Thank you, Owen. Let's go back to Slido for one more question.
Maybe. Okay. Yeah.
Let's see what we've got here. Okay. Here's a good one. Why are we keeping the deadline for CRUKS on January the 1st, 2021? Oh, sorry, this is, yes, 2021. Why not let that slide? Why is there no slippage in this timescale? René, it sounds like one for you again.
Yeah, it's one for me, but in a certain sense, it's not one for me, because as I said before my introduction, this is really a political decision. Because our minister, but also our House of Representatives wanted it and still want it, that we start with the working with this exclusion register with the land-based operators. So the effect to that is that the opening up of the market after the application processes will take some 6 months, that there will be a separate implementation of the register for land-based and for the remote sector. But this is really a political choice.
Okay, once again, we're in the hands of politicians. No, we've had 1 hour of this webinar, and I think Willem would very much like me to wrap this up. So it's been a great pleasure to discuss this with you today, all 4 of you. actually with René and Jeroen, that's all 6 of you, quite a big panel. We've done well to get through it all, and I think we've come up with some pretty interesting answers to people's questions on the timing and the practicalities of this implementation. I'm going to thank Owen and Frank and Yanni, Jerome, René, and pass you now back to Willem. I think I've got everyone there, but am I not? And pass you back to Willem, who's going to sign off on this webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for everything so far. There were still quite some questions left, so we will write a webinar report in the next few days and answer together with some of the panelists some of the questions that were still left over in Slido. So thank you for that. This was the second installment in our new Gaming in Holland webinar series. We offer similar webinar series for gaming in Spain and gaming in Germany communities. Also, this webinar was recorded. A link to the recording will be shared in our next newsletter together with that report. And if you have not signed up for the free newsletter, please do that at our website, gaminginholland.com. I would like to thank today's speakers, René, Yanni, Frank, David, Erwin, Jeroen, and Andrew for the contributions, insights, and excellent moderation. And finally, I would like to thank our team, Jeroen, Sarah, Dan, and Gil, for all the hard work behind the scenes. As I mentioned before, we have now set the date for this year's Gaming Holland conference on the 22nd of September, only a few months before the Remote Gaming Act will get into force. René Jansen, and thank you, René, has kindly agreed to deliver the keynote speech there. We're working hard at the moment to ensure a corona-proof environment for the event, and I hope to see you all there. Thank you for listening to this webinar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Willem.
Thank you, Willem.
Hey.
Thank you, Willem. Thanks, everyone.
Right.